Hi, this is Dr. Catherine Beatty, and I'm going to be talking about MCAT topic 3B, particulate filtration. So what is particulate filtration and why is it important? Well, it's basically how our respiratory system cleans and filters the air that we breathe to protect us from environmental hazards like dust and diseases. So I just love particulate filtration in the respiratory system because I think it's really clever. So the important thing to realize is that when we breathe, we don't actually just breathe in gases, right? We breathe in other things too, unintended things, things like pollen, pollution, bacteria, and even viruses. So I'm going to put some particles here to represent those things. Here's a little virus. Well, it's a big virus, but you get the picture, right? And other things. So, what protects us from those things in the environment? Believe it or not, the first line of defense we have against inhaling yucky things is actually our nose hairs. I know, and you just thought they were for looks. No. They actually serve a purpose. So these guys actually can trap the larger molecules that we breathe in, so they never enter into the nasal passages. But let's say, we do breathe past these nasal hairs and things make it into the nasal passages. What then? Well, the next line of defense is actually the respiratory mucosa. Respiratory mucosa. Now, the respiratory mucosa is sort of a lining of cells that lines the entire respiratory tree. And this lining of cells is made up of two basic types of cells. And the first type of cell secretes this yucky, sticky mucus. It's kind of gross to think about it, but it serves an amazing function. And this mucus is produced by a goblet cell. Goblet cell. And this cell sort of secretes this mucus, sticky mucus that lines the entire respiratory tree. And when the particles sort of flow over it, so let's have a little particle here flowing over it, it gets stuck, it just sticks there to this sticky mucus. Now, the second type of cell that sort of makes up the respiratory mucosal lining is something called a ciliated cell. Cilia. And these cells are just, regular cells, and they have these organelles that are kind of like finger-like projections that come off the top of the cells. And these little cilia actually move in a coordinated effort. They beat to move any trapped particles that land on top of them back towards, the throat, where these things can be either swallowed or spit out. And I know that sounds gross, but that's actually what happens. It happens all the time, whether you're thinking about it or not. And here's an up-close look of the cilia. And I include that because I just think they're really cool looking. I mean, look at these guys. They look like brushes, and they just, in a coordinated fashion, beat and beat and beat. And they take that contaminated mucus that has, little particles on it, and they beat to move it back to the throat, back here where it can be spit out or swallowed. And these cilia and these goblet cells don't just live sort of in the nasal mucosa. They actually line all of the respiratory trees. So you can see here in the bronchus and the bronchioles, they're there also. But what if a particle, beating all the odds, makes it down to the alveolar sacs? Right? So where gas exchange takes place. What then do we do? Well, that's where the next line of defense comes in, and that's an alveolar macrophage. An alveolar macrophage is actually a phagocytic cell, and a phagocytic cell is a cell that can engulf a threat, something that's produced or comes in contact with it, and once it engulfs it, it can sort of kick off these inflammatory mediators that trigger our immune system to start working. So these cells can engulf these threats and then activate either pro or anti-inflammatory responses based on the threat itself. And it's actually one of the major one of its major roles is to protect us from inhaled bacteria and viruses and fungus. So let's just take a minute back and just to sort of underscore the importance of the respiratory mucosa and its role in defending us from environmental hazards and disease. Let's just talk about something which happens actually in real life when the cilia don't work properly, and that's something that's called primary ciliary dyskinesia, and it's also called Cartaginer syndrome. And these patients who have Cartaginer syndrome actually have cilia that don't work properly, or they don't work at all. And you can imagine what happens, right? If you have cilia and their whole function is to sort of move that contaminated mucus up out of the respiratory system, and they can't do that properly. So these people have sort of a chronic wet cough from that mucus that they can't get out of their lungs and their nasal passages, and also they suffer from lots more respiratory illnesses because they can't get rid of these threats, these disease threats to them. So it's really an important function that the respiratory system plays in protecting us from environmental hazards and disease. So that's particulate filtration in the respiratory system. Hope it's helpful. Thanks.